I'm Chad. I work on an application called Wunderlist. Anyone use Wunderlist here by chance? All right, thank you. Everyone else download it. It's free. It's wonderful. Wonderful. Tomorrow, it's just a to-do list application. That's all it is. But tomorrow I'm going to talk about why we have 150 microservices in something like 15 different languages to power just a to-do list application. Yeah, the name of my talk is The Passionate Programmer, The Good Parts. Passionate Programmer, as you can probably tell, is a book that I've written, and I wrote it 10 years ago, and I'm going to try and extract the good things from it. Now, the book is about career development, and I was actually asked to speak at this conference about this book that I wrote 10 years ago, which is always an interesting thing for me to be asked to speak about things that I did 10 years ago. So, speaking of career development, one of the weirdest things I ever expected to happen has happened this year. I am now a manager at Microsoft. I'm called Partner Group Engineering Manager, which is the sexiest title that anyone has ever had in software. I hope you agree. Microsoft bought Wunderlist. So we're based in Berlin. I was CTO, so Chief Technology Officer for Wunderlist, and now I'm Partner Group Engineering Manager for Microsoft. Very impressive. So this is a tale of a person who is completely unqualified to be standing here before you today. I probably have the worst credentials of anyone in the room. I was educated as a saxophone player, a jazz saxophone player, and a classical music composer. But then I dropped out, so I didn't even get a degree in that. I come from Arkansas in the United States, which is not known for being a place to get a great education or to be well-cultured. And I'm the first person in my family to ever go to college, and my extended family, to ever go to university. And I really disappointed my parents when I dropped out. So I'm pretty much a failure all around. So I started my career as a saxophone player, and part of the reason that I dropped out of university is because I was already working, and there's no need to have a degree in music to work, and in fact it doesn't really help you in any way. The only reason you get a degree in music is because you like playing and you're supposed to go to university so you don't know what else to do, so that's what I did. But once I started working as a musician, I dropped out, and so I would go play gigs every night. I was playing rhythm and blues music in Memphis, Tennessee, with people like the High Rhythm Section, who were the backing group for Al Green and Ann Peebles and people like that. You probably don't know who that is because we're in Poland and you're all too young anyway. But maybe you've heard the song Love and Happiness by Al Green. It's those people. If not, search for Bing for that. I got really into playing Doom back then, so I would go play music in the bars all night, and then about 3 or 4 a.m. I would go home and I would play Doom Deathmatch until 9 a.m. in the morning. Doom was such an important thing to me that I tattooed it on my arm here. And I did this not when I was 20, like you would think this is a stupid thing to do, right? But I waited until I was 40 or so, which proves that I'm a real idiot, but also that I'm a discerning idiot. But the reason I did it is because Doom awakened my imagination. You know, I was in music not to get a good job, obviously. You'd be an idiot to be in music to get a good job. I was in music because I thought I could do something special. And I thought I could be important and change the field of music in some way. And be, oh, nice. So when I saw Doom, I felt something that had the same sort of creative appeal as music, like it made me feel a way. And so I would spend all night playing Doom, but then eventually I wanted to know how it worked, because I was amazed that human beings had created this immersive environment that I could use for doing such a highly skilled task as playing deathmatch. So I logged into these VAX computers. Has anyone ever used one of these? Yeah? Not very many people are alive and still using computers that use these. That's not actually true. But I used these VAX computers, and I would get on the VMS operating system, and I would use Gopher to look up what does it mean to type text into a document and then somehow have it run? I remember that being a very clear question that I had back then. But I was really trying to figure out how this worked. And I ended up finding my way around this VMS system quite well so well that I got a job in my university's IT department. And I did that because my friend saw that I was good at making Doom modifications and I could use VMS. So he applied for a job for me in the IT department and then drove me to the interview. And when I walked in, the boss, the hiring manager said, well, Walter says you're good, so when can you start? So that was how I joined the IT industry. And so then I started learning about Novell NetWare. Did that happen here? Do you know about that? Probably not now. Only old people know about that. Yeah, I keep looking at Rob on these things, but you'll see him later today, and you'll see that he's old and he knows about these things. So Novell NetWare I got really into. I still think there was nothing as amazing as the directory service in NetWare 4 and above, but Novell has basically failed. And I don't mean that in like a snarky way, I mean literally they basically failed. But I ended up being a network administrator, and then I got into programming. I got really into Perl, because that's how you make 3D first-person shooters, is you learn Perl. You don't know what Perl is either, do you? See, these jokes don't work anymore. 10 years ago, everyone knew what Perl was. Nobody uses it. But I ended up being a network programmer 2 or something on the campus. Like that was not as sexy a title as partner group engineering manager, actually. Network programmer 2. So here I am at the university. I'm still mostly making a living playing saxophone in clubs on Beale Street in Memphis. And then I heard about this friend, this mutual friend of a group of us, who had gone to work at FedEx. And this guy was an idiot. He was clueless. But he went to FedEx and he immediately bought a Mercedes. And you have to remember, that I was a poor kid from Arkansas. I mean, I thought like if I ever make 20,000 US dollars a year, then I'm going to be rich, you know. And so that would be like 15,000 euros or something like that. I thought I would be able to live like a king if my wife and I combined could make $20,000 a year. So this guy he was just clueless, he was an idiot, and he went to FedEx and he bought this Mercedes, and I thought, now I'm a programmer. So I went to FedEx too. I didn't buy a Mercedes. I actually bought a very old Volvo station wagon for $5,000, which I loved. And then I learned Java, and I became at FedEx, for some reason, the Java and LDAP guy, so the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. And a lot of that is based on the fact that I had been doing Novell NDS. I became this directory services guru somehow. I don't know. My wife also worked at FedEx as a network administrator. And I had this idea that it would be great if she could retire. So, you know, we were in our 20s at the time, but I thought it would be nice if she could retire, maybe we start a family. So I went onto this site called Monster.com, which I think still exists, but I don't think anyone uses it anymore because LinkedIn and other things have replaced it. But back then, you would put in your stuff on Monster.com about what you can do, and you would put a minimum salary, and then employers would put what their salary possibilities were and the things they were looking for, and it would match you up. So if they weren't willing to pay the minimum salary, then they wouldn't, you wouldn't hit for them. It was a pretty cool system for people like me. So I put in the combined salary of me and my wife one morning on a Saturday. I figured, no way this is going to happen. And the phone started ringing off the hook because I knew Java and Perl and LDAP and Unix, all these things together. It was apparently a big deal at that time, so I ended up getting hired and moving to GE, where suddenly I went from being like an entry-level self-taught programmer to a senior application architect, or something like that. Senior application architect, yeah. So I had 1 year of experience, maybe, that you could really call experience. And at GE, I ordered about $1 million worth of Sun hardware, set it up in the data center with another buddy there, and basically established the ECommerce practice for General Electric Corporation. We built a model view controller framework in Java before Struts was created. So, you know, this was like 1999 now. That thing is still in use. I think there were several hundred applications sadly built on that terrible framework that we made. And I had no idea what I was doing. I think back then I barely knew what object orientation was. Then, suddenly, I think it was like 2 years after that, I was interviewing for the job of Chief Technology Officer for GE Appliances. So the General Electric group that sells dishwashers and laundry and that sort of stuff. And I was interviewing for that job, and I was pretty much going to get that job. So now I've got 3 years of experience or something like that. But an opportunity came up where I had become this guy who carried around Martin Fowler's refactoring book and went to all of our consulting or contractors and basically yelled at them and pointed at the book and focused on code quality and process and culture of development. And we had been doing a bunch of offshore outsourcing to India. So the CIO who was interviewing for the CTO job, interviewing me, my first interview, he said, I heard you might want to go to India. You want to do that or be CTO? So instead of becoming CTO, I moved to India, and from scratch, I set up a software development center for GE. So basically a new GE business in Bangalore. I hired 350 or so people, including an executive team, and then I left after a year and a half. And in that time, I learned Hindi, the language Hindi, and the language Kannada, and it was basically a life-changing experience. There I was also called CTO, but of this tiny business that you've never heard of. I can't even remember what it was called. So now I've got 5 years of experience or so, and I was CTO, and I was in India, and I learned Hindi and all this stuff. And around this time, the Agile Manifesto was written. I had also gotten really into the idea of extreme programming. And because I was just a stupid kid that was from a music background, I just reached out to all the people who were in this environment. So like most of the people in this picture, which is the people who penned the Agile Manifesto originally, I ended up somehow becoming friends with on the internet. Especially Dave Thomas, who is the one on the far left. He goes by Prag Dave online, or Pragmatic Dave Thomas, because he's one of the authors of The Pragmatic Programmer. Have you read The Pragmatic Programmer? Yeah. Everyone should read The Pragmatic Programmer. Is everyone a software developer in this room? Okay, so those who have not read it, you need to read it. But Dave was also really into this thing called Ruby. Have you heard of Ruby in Poland? Yeah, okay, that's a joke. I've been here before, I know. So because Dave was getting into Ruby, Dave and his partner Andy ended up writing the book, the Programming Ruby, which was the book that introduced Ruby to the English-speaking world in the year 2000. I started looking at Ruby because I thought these guys are smart, I really love their ideas in the Agile world, and I ended up contacting Dave and writing some documentation using the same formats they were using and trying to augment the stuff they had put online for the book. So I had gotten involved in the Ruby community. Dave and I ended up organizing the first international Ruby conference together, along with another guy named David Plack, which was like the Ruby conference for the Ruby programming language. And there were 34 people there, so it wasn't a very big deal back then. But when I got back to India, I was talking to Dave on Instant Messenger, because that's what people used back then instead of Snapchat or whatever. And Dave, he was asking what I had done. And when I was in India, a funny thing happened. Because of my vast wealth of experience, I had become sort of like de facto mentor for most of the developers on the team in India. And so I told him what my days were like, how I was really integrating into the Indian culture, but then I spent a lot of time just giving career advice to people and helping them connect to the people in the US and plan their careers in software development. And he started asking me well, what did you tell them? How did you know what to tell them, and what were you telling them? And I started talking about the stuff that I had done, and he said, you should write a book about this. So I wrote a book, and Dave and I came up with this funny idea for the title. My job went to India, and all I got was this lousy book, 52 Ways to Save Your Job. It was sort of a play on the fact that my job had literally gone to India and I went with it. So it wasn't a negative book, but it ended up feeling kind of negative. It felt like one of those nasty American Republican people who are always complaining about immigrants and offshore outsourcing and losing their jobs. But I wrote this book. We later released a second edition, which is, I think you would agree, a more positive spin on the idea. The Passionate Programmer. This captured the essence of what I had really written, creating a remarkable career in software development. Isn't that what it says? Oh yeah, okay. That'd be funny if I forgot. So it's funny though, because like I published this thing and it was the beginning of my career. And so for me, if I look back now on my career and I were to share with someone what I had done, you don't have to read all these things here, but most of the things I've done in my career that I think are important actually happened after I wrote the book about how to create a remarkable career. Kind of ironic. So like I've sold 2 companies, including this last one, to Microsoft. Like Bill Gates reviewed our architecture. Bill Gates, that's pretty amazing, reviewed our architecture and agreed that they should buy us. I do conference keynotes. I don't know how many I've done since then, but it was all after this point. Traveled the world, worked from all over the place. Now I live in Berlin. I'm from Arkansas. I didn't know what Berlin was. I thought it was a band from the 80s back then. I've led very, very large teams. I've led very small teams. I was part of one of the current batch of unicorns, where I had an engineering team of 10 people, and in a year and a half it went to 350 people that I was leading. So that sort of unicorn, crazy, insane VC-fueled growth. I wrote the book Rails Recipes, which was the second ever book written about Rails, and it came out right after Dave's Agile Web Development with Rails book. And Rails, kind of got to be a big thing. So Rails Recipes was a bestseller, and like a lot of stuff happened for me after that. I also started the International Rails Conference, aka RailsConf, which I was the chair of for 6 years or so. I was the chair of RubyConf for 10 years. All these things happened after that. But on top of these things, when you're doing all this community stuff, like massive conferences, 2,500 people that you're like shepherding for a few days, that are passionately and emotionally engaged in what you're doing, a lot of drama comes with that. So, people posting stuff about me online being crappy, and one guy publicly calling for my execution by hanging, for example. That was a dark day, because people are assholes on the internet, but normally they don't say that the community should rise up and literally kill you. Of course, he then excused himself by saying this was a metaphor, but the problem with metaphors is they're not obviously metaphors when you say them. So my family didn't like that, when someone is posting that the Ruby community should rise up and hang me from a tree and then set fire to it and urinate on the ashes. I don't know why they didn't like that, but they didn't. I've had situations since then, like I did some high-end consulting work for quite a while, lots of terrible clients, lots of people not wanting to pay. One client, literally insane, threatened legal action and tried to have me ostracized from the industry because of some crazy thing that he believed happened, which didn't. So some pretty terrible stuff as well, which means I've learned a lot. Building a team from 10 to 350 people in a year, you make a lot of mistakes there, and you hurt a lot of feelings, and you screw up, and then you embarrass yourself. So all of this stuff happened in the last 10 years since I wrote a book about how to create a remarkable career in software development. So it's funny, when I was asked to come here and speak about this Passionate Programmer book, I realized that the date lines up almost exactly with the 10-year anniversary of publishing this book. And usually when I'm asked to speak about this topic now, I say no, because I'm just kind of tired of it. I've done it a lot. I've talked about career development so much that I kind of want to just say, well, you can read this book or not, whatever, I'll give it to you for free. But I don't know what else there is to say about it. However, I thought 10 years later, surely I've learned something since then, so maybe I can use this to reflect. I was an idiot 10 years ago. Think about yourself 10 years ago, and what you thought was true, and how badass you thought you were 10 years ago. You were probably pretty lame too, compared to now, I hope. And I hope in 10 years from now, I will feel the same way about myself right now. So I started digging through the book, literally chapter by chapter, making little notes, crossing things out, etc. And the main thing that stood out to me is that there's just too much junk in this book. And you think about it, like when you talk to someone who is young and has something to prove about something, they always just talk too much. Maybe like I'm doing now, I don't know, but I have a time box, so it's okay. But they talk too much. They say more things than they need to. They try too hard to, see, I did it once. They try too hard to convince you. So it's like a sophomoric problem, just blah, 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 blah. So the funny thing is, as a composer, I had already learned this lesson very, very deeply. I studied with this man named Kamran Ince, or Kamran Ince, I think is how it's actually pronounced. He's Turkish-American. He is my favorite composer to have ever lived. So he's way better than like Beethoven, for example. And I just say that so you'll look him up and listen to some of the music. But he was my teacher when I was studying composition in school, classical music composition. And he had a really funny personality. I would bring music, and I would just bring like sheets and sheets of music, and he would sit at his piano somewhat silently, intensely looking at it and like flipping the pages and breathing heavily, and he could clearly hear all the music in his head as he was going through. And then he would start writing bullshit all over the paper, just bullshit, crossing things out. And the thing that he almost always told me when I brought a new piece to him is, you have so many good ideas in this piece, but you only need one. Everything else is in the way. Find the essence of the music and do that. That's what music should be. You're trying to prove something. You're just forcing all this crap into it. And my music leveled way up when I realized that, when I had the guts to back off and only have the one main idea and explore the one main idea. So I had learned that a long time ago, but I didn't apply it very well to my writing. So now I want to take a moment, or maybe 30 moments, and try to explore what the essence of what I was trying to say in this book was. The nice thing, after 10 years of having a book published on creating a remarkable career in software development, is I have heard from people all over the world quite constantly about how following the instructions, if you could call it that in the book, has changed their career for the better. So I know there's something here, even though I wrote it, and I sort of discount it. I know there's something valuable here, but it's surrounded by all this junk that's not necessary. So I'm going to do now an abbreviated version of The Passionate Programmer and explain to you what the essence is. And at the end, then if you haven't read it, you don't ever have to read it, because I've already told you everything. Although my writing is pretty good, so you might just enjoy, like bedtime reading. It's pretty good. I'm not going to lie, it's nice. So here's the table of contents of the book. What I tried to do was, and I don't know why I thought this was a good metaphor, but I tried to present the career aspect, yourself, your individual professional self, as being like a product that needs to be developed, or some sort of business that is introduced to a market. And part of the reason for that is I'd spent so much time with people who complained from a personal perspective about how a company doesn't value them, and there's sort of like this millennial desire to just have fun and do whatever you want, and not be held accountable for things. But all of us actually have to function in the context of business somehow if we want to make money. And I think there are a lot of interesting metaphorical relationships between how I develop myself as a product on a market, but the product being a software developer that a company might want to pay for, that help me less emotionally position myself and think about it rationally from the perspective of being a transaction. But it also helps break down this whole very difficult feeling thing of building a great career into a system. And ultimately, I like to break things into systems, even in music. My best music has been, create a crazy piece of music, but in sonata allegro form, which is like this probably is not a good metaphor for you, sorry. You can bing it though. So the simplified phases of developing a product in my world, in my book, are first you have to choose the market that you want to be in, then you invest in the product itself, then you execute on that product, then you have to market it or else no one will know what it is, And then you refresh the product, or you continue to reinvent and improve whatever you have as an offering. So I'm going to go through each one of these and talk about what I really meant. So the first one, choose your market. Now, if you and I wanted to start a company together, we would first have to figure out what the hell we want to do. So you have to decide, like, I want to be in this market, I want to help this sort of person, I'm going to create this sort of product. It's funny how, in my dealings with software developers, especially as a mentor, I've heard a lot of things like, I would ask people in India when I was interviewing them, have you ever played with, I don't know, like the latest Java thing, maybe it was generics back then. And they would say, well, I haven't had an opportunity at work to do that. Or I've never received training on that. And I started realizing that, like, most people that I know, and probably most people in the world, like, here's a meta statement, most people in the world suck at their job. That is true. And probably the people in this room, there's less of a percentage. Some of you also suck, though, just to be clear. But it's a smaller percentage. But I would guess that most people in the world suck at their jobs, which the good news is it makes it very, very easy to stand out. Because I think the big thing that's missing, the number one thing that's missing, is that most people don't actually take any control. They don't create an intention and then express that intention through their actions. So that's what this whole section of the book was really about. And I have here, I don't know if any of you know this video game called Lemmings, but that's the visual here is supposed to show that people are just sort of like floating down the river of life with no control and just seeing where it goes. And maybe like lemmings, they're going to fall off of a cliff and die, whatever. They're not directing them. And so if you choose to direct that, you already at least probably end up in this room where it's less likely you suck. Yeah? So then this becomes just a simple question of analysis. Which technology do you want to do? Which domain do you want to work in? All of these things matter. This is what I mean by choosing your market, like acting with intent. Since a lot of the things that I do are based on video games, I think a big reason I moved so quickly in my career, this is from World of Warcraft, by the way, this is a skill tree. I thought of my career as being like a role-playing game, because not only am I just a saxophone player with imposter syndrome all the time, like I don't belong here, I don't belong at Microsoft, but I'm also an intense introvert. Very shy. Like in my first job, we switched to direct deposit payments from checks. We used to get checks for our payment. And when we switched to direct deposit, I had to have a bank account. And I had never had a bank account. And I was so nervous that I made someone else from the office go with me to set up the bank account because I was like too uncomfortable to do that. That is my personality naturally. So I viewed my entire career as like a role-playing game until ultimately I won, and now I don't know what to do. Really, I'm done, but I won the game I was playing. But the whole idea of choosing technology and team and domain, for me, it really helps to think of it like a skill tree. Like you can decide in each one the things that you want to like major in or focus on, and build your own version of a software developer in the market. I don't know why, but there's one chapter of my book that everyone references when they read it, that they love. And it is based on a quote from the jazz guitarist Pat Metheny. He says something, I'll paraphrase because maybe I have the wrong words, but he says, always be the worst guy in every band you're in. And what he means by that is always seek to play in a band where all the other players are better than you. This expresses something very interesting about intent, that you really should be thinking very hard about which team you're going to be on. I've read studies that say, like, if you hang out with people who are overweight, you are statistically far more likely to be overweight. If you hang out with people who smoke, you will not be able to quit smoking. In my own experience, playing music, a few times I would go play with people that I had no business playing with. They were just way better than me. And what I learned over time is every time I did that, I would adapt and I would play like them. I played up to them. And when I played with bad people, I played down to them. So I would be a bad saxophone player with one group and a pretty good saxophone player with a different group. And so that's what Pat Metheny means. I don't think this is one of the most important parts of the book, but everyone likes this when they read it, so it must be important. So act with intent. That's all the choose your market thing means. Next phase, invest in the actual product. And in this case, the product is you. So you have to invest in it. And for me, it goes back to music. So in 1999, I think I played my last real professional gig. And I was touring in Europe playing saxophone with European blues bands, which is funny. I don't know what it is with Europeans and the blues, but you guys really like blues music, apparently. Then in the year 2007, that was the next time I seriously tried to play saxophone again. So I was really good. I had dedicated many, many years to learning the saxophone, and I just put it down for several years. And when I picked it back up, the first thing I noticed is, oh God, I sound terrible. But it was pretty easy to get back to my old level. I was a naturally gifted saxophonist. And I don't mean that to say that I'm a genius and you should all be in awe, but I was naturally good at it. I could play by ear. If you play a song to me, I could play it back without asking you what the notes are. I had a really good sound. There were a few things that I could do really well. And as a result, I had enough fun playing saxophone and guitar, actually, that I never really invested in myself as a saxophonist. So I got to a certain level, and I never really went any farther. When I picked it back up, I was several years older, and I was starting from scratch. I didn't have the advantage. I could only play by myself. And I found myself actually investing minutes in real practice. So thinking about, how can I get better at this? Because I know I used to be much better, so what are the steps I need to take to be good again? And it was really strange after just a few weeks of being rigid and having a system and focusing on work, investment in saxophone. I was probably better than I had ever been before after laying off for 8 years or so, which is not intuitively what you would think would happen. I read this book a few years ago from Haruki Murakami, who is maybe my favorite novelist. I recommend him. This book is not a novel, this is a memoir, and it's marginally sort of about running, but it's actually more about life. And there was one thing that stood out in the book to me. He was talking about how Murakami, like me, naturally gets fat. So if he's not careful, he gets fat. And he runs marathons, so it's pretty easy now for him not to get fat. But his wife, on the other hand, never gets fat. No matter what she does, no matter what she eats, she never gets fat. And he said he used to be really jealous and angry that she could be like that. And they would eat the same things and do the same amount of exercise, and he would be fat and she would be thin. And over time, he realized that he was the lucky one. Because she, though she was not fat, she didn't have any outward sign, she was actually very unhealthy, even when she wasn't fat. Whereas when he would start to live in an unhealthy manner, his body would visibly give him a sign and his clothes wouldn't fit, and he would have to do something about it. And what it all boils down to is that someone who has this natural ability to be a certain way doesn't have to create a system in order to be that way, and therefore it's not consistent and it's not actually healthy, and they're essentially not the thing that they portray themselves as. And Murakami found that he would create a system, he ultimately could be far healthier than other people because he didn't have a natural ability. I have found that in my career with musicians and software developers and others, that being a prodigy, being like a child superstar, is a curse. And I wasn't a prodigy, but I was naturally gifted on the saxophone. But what you find oftentimes is the people who are these like wunderkind, these amazing young people who can do anything, they never have to work. They never have to develop a system, and therefore they can't level up to a certain degree usually, and they can't deliver consistent results. A very quick side note, as developers, I'm talking about being a developer in the context of how you fit into business and commerce. it is very important to understand how business works. So unless you're going to spend all of your life in a certain class of nonprofits, but probably even then, like there's probably almost no case where it doesn't make sense to understand finance, accounting, balance sheets, how investments work, how equity works. All of this stuff is essential to the environment that you work in. Not only that, your business domain. So you work in a utility company, you should really understand how that works. Because otherwise, you're just a person who types in code and is told what to do. But the people who really excel as software developers are the ones that understand the problem and solve the problem and act in a more entrepreneurial way. Another investment that you should make is in mentoring. And in mentoring, I mean find a mentor, obviously, and also be a mentor. And remember that I had no experience, and I was a mentor for 100-something people, so you can do it even if you don't think you can. You always have something to teach. I found a guy in my early days, when I first started my accidental IT career. His name was Ken Smith. And Ken Smith told me, if you want to be good, do these 3 things. Learn a Unix, so probably Linux back then. Although it wasn't necessarily the case, we had AIX and digital Unix and all these other things that people don't really use anymore. Learn a directory service, because that was a really important concept. And as I said, NDS, the Novell thing, LDAP, that really shaped my career, so it was the right thing at that time. And learn a programming language. So he said, if you do these 3 things, you'll get to the next level, and then we can talk about what's next. And it was a great amount of system. It was just enough system for me to get really focused and subdivide the problem space and do it. It was the most important moment of my career. As a side note, if you're a young person here today and you would like a similar 3 things, I would say get hardcore into Linux. Hardcore into Linux and containers right now. Learn how to do mobile development on one platform, iOS, Android, Windows Phone. And then learn functional programming, some functional programming language to do server-side stuff. So this gives you the ability to do full stack development. And if you do all 3 of these things and you haven't already done them, then email me and I'll tell you what to do next. And again, it's like the skill tree thing. So I don't know, if you're a nerd that plays video games like me, this might resonate with you. The other thing that I didn't really understand about finding a mentor, though, was that mentors are also advocates. They can be. So if I sign up to be your mentor, I start to personally take ownership in your success. And though he didn't really do it explicitly, Dave Thomas, early in my career, became my mentor. And he also became my advocate. So Dave Thomas, again, the Agile Manifesto author and pragmatic programmer author and owner of Pragmatic Bookshelf, the best publisher for software development books. He was a great mentor, but he also did things such as encourage me to co-organize RubyConf with him, which was definitely a career trajectory changer. He also asked me to write a chapter in the 2nd edition of Programming Ruby, which is the book about Ruby. And when I wrote the 1 chapter for him, he wrote my name on the front of the book. So I became a co-author of the most important book about Ruby. And then he asked me to write Rails recipes when I did. So I became the author of the 2nd most important book at that time of Rails. And suddenly, I am the Rails guy. And it's all because of Dave being an advocate. So in a certain way, I owe my career to him. But he didn't just find me on the internet. I found him. And my natural inclination is to be intimidated by people like that. And maybe you would feel the same. It's pretty natural. Another friend of mine who I met through all this stuff, he's Derek Sivers. He wrote, he created something called CD Baby many years ago, and he sold it. And now he's an entrepreneur living all over the world and doing TED Talks and stuff. He wrote a book called How to Make People Familiar with Your Music, or something like that. And he's actually renamed the link to it, but you can still find it as a free PDF. And it's a simple little marketing book. One of the things he talks about is how to connect with people that you want. And he says the best way to meet people, no matter who they are, no matter how intimidated you are by them, is to try to figure out a way you can help them. So if someone comes to me and they want to help me with something, I mean, I'm pretty nice anyway, but it's really hard for me to blow someone off if they're trying to offer me help, if it's real, earnest help. And the way that I got to know Dave Thomas was actually asking if I could volunteer to help him maintain online documentation for Ruby, and I was going to fill out a whole section that he had not touched yet. And I really didn't want anything as a result. I mean, I wanted to be able to interact with him because I thought he was so intelligent, but really I just wanted to help with it. And that literally is how we met, and all this other stuff has happened for me since. The next thing is, and this is very, very important, become a mentor. And that can mean a lot of different things. I have a picture here of Martin Fowler, who I'm not related to, by the way. And I saw Martin speak in Bangalore many, many years ago, and the one thing that stood out from his talk is he just sort of made a silly side comment. He said, whenever I want to learn something, I write a book about it. So that sounds kind of crazy the first time you hear it. When I wrote Rails recipes, though, I actually had not been using Rails yet. 10. Is that my score? He gave me a 10. No, I have 10 minutes left. I had not used it much yet. I wrote the book, and in writing the book, I had to tear the subject apart. I had to go deep into it. I had to read every line of the framework at the time, and I developed an expertise beyond almost anyone I knew for years. Even when I had not kept my knowledge fresh and not used Rails for a while, I learned it so deeply by teaching it that this knowledge of it lasted for years and years. Now I'm clueless though, so do not hire me for a Rails project. I also wrote a career book before I had really had a remarkable career. I mean, it was pretty good at the time, but I would argue that a large reason, other than the marketing benefits, a large reason that I have been successful to the level I have since I wrote the book 10 years ago is that I did so much thinking and speaking and writing about how to do it. So I had prepared myself in a way that I had not done before. So mentoring people puts you in the situation where you have to teach. And it's sort of a truism and obvious, but teaching makes you better at the subject. Something I brought with me from music is the concept of practice. This is John Coltrane. John Coltrane, it is said, would sit in his room with the door closed and sometimes play a single note for hours. Like his wife apparently came in once after hearing him play the same note for 10 hours or so and found him asleep with the saxophone in his mouth. And he was just trying to get the sound perfect on the one note. And the one thing that's very important to know about practicing in music, if you're practicing and it sounds good, you're not practicing, you're playing. So practice involves stretching yourself beyond your normal limits. You probably won't remember this, but you can search for it on the internet if you just stare at it for a second. Here is a great example of practice in our field. If you are into Postgres especially, you will find this interesting, Rob. This guy is Hans-Jürgen Schönig. He's an amazing Postgres expert from Austria that has done some consulting work for us when we have been in trouble. He did a presentation about trying to do a million table join in Postgres. So do a query with a million tables joined together. And it's just fascinating. All we have online, unfortunately, are the slides, but he created this ridiculous constraint that wasn't going to work, and then he went through the steps of trying to make it work. And this is what I mean by practice. It's brilliant. Obviously, we don't do enough of this in the industry, actually read code. Every other field does, it's crazy. So here is the most important section, and it's almost the end, I think, but if not, I'm gonna go real fast because I only have 7 minutes left. So if you forget everything else, this is the thing to remember. Execution. It's the thing that people fail at. The most frustrating thing that I ever encounter, and it happens pretty frequently, I sort of talk about the opposite of it in the book. There's a chapter called Be Where You're At. But the concept is you have a position, you have work to do. The most frustrating thing that you can do is be someone of high potential, high intelligence, everything going for you, and then obsessed with the next thing. So you're so obsessed with how you can be recognized, how you can get a promotion, how you can publish a book and be well known, that you actually suck at your job. That's the first thing. And I think it's important to mention in a presentation like this, because this is all about moving forward in your career, but you have to step back and realize that the best way to move forward is to kick ass in the moment and to actually do the thing that you're supposed to be doing and do it well. Getting things done feels great. I mean, you think about it, the best moments of your career have been when you're just knocking things out, even when it's in a high-stress situation, maybe even especially in a high-stress situation, right? That time that you have a crazy deadline or there's an outage and you're coming together with your team and you're just producing amazing results in a short period of time. It's funny because that feels the best, but we so infrequently, as humans, I don't know why, put ourselves into situations where we're executing that way. So Bob Martin, or Uncle Bob as he goes by online, he took the concept of the 40-hour work week from extreme programming and he rephrased it as the 8-hour burn, which I love, and I try to think about it every day at work. While you're there, like don't work a crazy number of hours, but while you're there, be so intensely focused on being productive and intelligent and doing a great job that by the end of the day, by the end of a normal or even short work day, you have nothing left. You have to leave. You have to relax. That's the 8-hour burn. I recently read this, which was recommended to me by the CIO for the executive branch of the United States government, weirdly, who came interviewing for a job with me. He said this is the system that he uses to succeed in life, and he's had pretty great success, being part of the Obama administration. The essence of this book is basically to create stress, because that's how we grow, but then to be really good about recovery. So that same concept, like the 8-hour burn idea, create stress, just like in practice, stress is what causes you to grow, but also it's when you operate the best, when you're fully engaged in things. So whenever you're working, just be completely there, completely with it. Don't put things off. Don't turn things into projects that you can accomplish right now. Just burn through things. You're going to feel better. I had a coworker way back when who had a system where every day he wanted to have something he could report to his team as a success, like a nameable thing. And think about how many days go by in your job that by the end of the day, all you could really say is, well, I worked on this module, or whatever it was. But always try to accomplish something that you can feel proud of that you did. Not for the benefit of someone else, not for like impressing someone, but for feeling good about it. And Andy Hunt, who is Dave Thomas's partner, published something several years ago, which was basically a take on this, like take a day. And this sounds insane because you should be like this every day, but in a given day, think to yourself, like, how could I be the perfect executor today? How could I not waste a moment? How could I even do the shit work really great, as if it's the best thing I've ever gotten a chance to do? Ultimately, though, execution, like executing well, it's about being effective. It's about using your time, being fully engaged. It's not about efficiency. It's not about working more hours. So, like, think about what it would take to do your job in 20 hours and try it. See if you can do a better job in 20 hours a week than you could in 40. I think it's possible for most of us. The thing that most people get sick over is this concept. So software developers don't like marketing usually. And I even forget it, but we think of marketers as schmoozy liars. I think this came to me in a dream. So I like to say that I read an article at some point, but it's not true. Somehow I read an article in my mind that was called "Marketing is a Moral Imperative." I really think I dreamt it and I read it in my dream. But the idea was this. Say you have a product. I have a product. It is a device. It costs 100 euros. If I give it to you, it will generate in a legal, legitimate way 100 euros per week. You just have to have it. You pay 100 for it, and as long as you have it, you get another 100. Now, we're friends, you and I. We're good friends. I have this thing. It's for sale. I don't tell you about it. A year goes by, and after a year I say, oh yeah, I have this thing, or you find out about it, and you think, why the hell did you not tell me this? I would have given you the 100 euros for it. You robbed me of the opportunity of having 52 extra 100 euros, because I would have had it for a year. Think of yourself as a product like this. Create a product that is so valuable that not sharing it with others is robbing them of something. That's what I mean when I say marketing. The best marketing is to have a remarkable product. Search on the internet for Purple Cow if you have not read the book. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Finally, you've done all this stuff. You've created a great product. You're marketing it. You're out there. You need to not get stuck in the current position. So the main way we get stuck, and this happened to me for years, so it's the one that I focus on, is we turn our choices into like religious choices. So I was a Ruby guy, I identified as a Ruby guy, I evangelized Ruby. I think evangelism is actually a negative thing to do to yourself because it trains you to protect yourself from other ideas that you don't agree with. And usually at the beginning of evangelizing, you're actually doing the right thing, like you're building these defense mechanisms. But when the right thing slowly becomes the wrong thing, then you're trained still to defend against the outside world and other ideas. So you have to be very careful about that, especially if you're smart. Sort of going along with that, and we already know about the ideas of agile software development, apply those to your career as well. The last thing I want to talk about here is something from the book, The Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Robert Pirsig describes this concept of the South Indian monkey trap. And in South India, I lived in South India, there are these macaque monkeys. They're terrifying, they run, they steal things from you, like while you're holding them. They're a real nuisance. So the people in India, according to Pirsig, I never saw this happen, devised a system where they would drill holes in the ground, and then at the bottom they would scoop it out so it was bigger, and they would fill it with rice, and then they would wait. And monkeys would come, and they would stick their arms down the hole, then they would grab a big clump of rice, and they couldn't get their arm up, but they wanted the rice. So they valued the rice, and he's describing this concept called value rigidity. Then they would come along, and the monkey would just be stuck. It would be panicking, but it couldn't let go of the fact that it wanted the rice and it wanted to eat. So its values were screwed up. It had this rigidity that would allow the people to capture the monkeys. All right, I'm over time, but I'm just finishing now. Is that okay? -1. All right, I have to pay you €1 every minute I go over. Each of you. So what is this all about? What actually is the essence of this thing? I am constantly asked, because I'm the first one to go to college in my family, and I've been all over the world and all this stuff, I'm constantly asked, like, what should my daughter or son study when they go to university, like my nephews and nieces? And what I usually say is, totally doesn't matter. Do not even give them advice. The only advice, well, usually I say, don't even go to university, waste of time, but then they don't accept that. The only advice I give is do something that you're going to be engaged and passionate in. Let them do that, even if it's a stupid idea, even if it's American history. Like, no one's going to get a job with that. Because there's a reason that I called this book The Passionate Programmer. Passion is a renewable energy source. You know, it is a way that you can execute. It's a thing that you can build everything you do on. Passion does not mean, oh my God, follow your dreams. You can do anything you want. That's bullshit. You can't. No, passion means create this like flywheel thing. When you are passionate about something, you then do a great job at it. And when you do a great job, it creates passion. And the whole thing is this circular engine that drives you forward. Find that. That's what the entire book is about. And then, and this is a Kurt Vonnegut quote that I love, that you can just read here, don't forget to actually enjoy the station in life that you have. So if you're a software developer, if you're in this room, you are very lucky. I am very lucky. Be happy about it, and don't forget the moments where you're happy. Thank you very much.